I remember the moment after seeing my father again, after 10 years of estrangement for more than a decade. I was 16, young, idealistic, and by that first glance and that long-awaited moment, very much my father's progeny. For 3 months, we were cocooned in that father-daughter bond that people so often talk about. I relished every opportunity that I got to spend with him. I wanted to know so much about him and his life, and really enjoy the opportunity to understand the legacy that I had come from. Shortly after meeting my father again, after that estrangement, I received a phone call that he had been murdered. And when I learned about my father's death, something in me died too. It was my first experience with loss, and because I was so young, I had no idea how to really process and handle grief. And so I compromised my idealism for self-preservation and buried that pain somewhere deep inside me. A few years later, I would come to experience another moment of loss when I would go through a very painful divorce. And with those two deep cuts to my heart, I realized that if I didn't find a way to channel this grieving, if I didn't learn how to process, that I was never gonna come out of that pain and sadness. And so I turned to writing as a creative outlet and a pathway towards healing. And so I know that many of us are, after the election, sort of in our own moment of loss, right? Wherever your political affiliations lie, we all sort of feel that loss after November. And I know that our country is the most divisive that it's been in a long time. And so I want to use my time this morning to talk about what I've learned from loss, 3 lessons on finding creative inspiration in moments of loss. And my hope is that you'll take from this talk inspiration to go out and make something really powerful for our world. And so my first lesson is that pain becomes empathy. When my father died, and after I went through that divorce, it really caused me to be intentional about being so sensitive to the fact that others around me were hurting. As I began writing, I recognized that I was able to tell stories and tell my own story from a place of really being authentic and being raw and being able to connect with my audiences in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do before if I hadn't been able to understand the depth of what pain truly is. And so if we're gonna be creators and makers and innovators, we are gonna have to learn how to meet people in their moments of triumphs and joys and tragedies, and yes, even in their moments of loss. And when we create from that space of empathy, we're moving from creativity to transforming. My second lesson is that loss forces you to see. If you've ever experienced losing something very meaningful to you, maybe it was a job, or if you've ever lost a loved one or have ever experienced a fractured relationship, then it teaches you how fleeting life can be, and it really forces you to open your eyes to the world around you. It allows you to become sensitive to the fact that you are just a speck in this world, and that life is so much grander than that one solitary moment. But it also inspires you to see also the beauty in the world around you, and it really points the direction of your creativity to focus on what's most important around you, and it allows you to create from that place of seeing things in a very real and authentic and engaging way. And then my third lesson, which I believe is the most important, is that loss is one moment in a greater story. After I lost my father, and when I went through my divorce, I could not have imagined a time where I would ever laugh or smile again, let alone make it out the bed each morning. But in writing and in finding creative inspiration and going through those experiences, I learned how to see the legacy that my father left in me and for me. Sometimes it would be just a song that I would hear that we would sing on a car ride, or I would pick up the tennis racket that he gave me just before he died. And I would write from that place of recognizing that, you know, the loss, as painful as it was just a moment, and there was a greater story that needed to be told. The same thing with my divorce. When I went through that divorce, I never imagined that I was going to be able to fall in love again, and I did. I gave myself permission to feel, to experience the pain, to feel the pain, to write about that pain, to connect with other people because of that pain. And to realize that my story was so much greater than loss. And the same is true for all of us. As creators, no matter what we're experiencing or the stories that we see around us, it's just a moment, one moment in a bigger story that's being told. And so I know that each of you, having experienced your own perspectives or moments of loss, probably feel like, I don't know that I'm going to get to the other side of this. But I want to encourage you that if you allow the pain to become empathy, and that if you see the world around you as being greater than that moment, and recognizing that it's all a part of a bigger story, I believe that you're going to tell one of the greatest stories that you've ever told, and that you'll realize that it might have been just the best thing that ever happened to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you to my amazing friends. God bless you. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Shakirah for sharing that with us this morning. It's a little unfortunate after listening to something like that I have to get up and grab the microphone. Need a minute. No, I think another thing about all of this, it was so compelling to hear Shakirah's proposal that she wanted to talk about this, and I think it's so relevant right now that it seemed like the perfect match. And not only that, but she's so into this and so dedicated. She actually emailed and is like, I know it's not the best position to be in for people to remember my talk and stuff like that, but I'd really like to lead things off tomorrow if that's okay. And I was like, well, I can't argue with that. So big applause for her again.
Hey guys, my name is Julia, and I'm here to talk to you today about not the moment of creative ignition or like the creative spark that I think a lot of us have felt, that moment of like, this is a great idea and I want to do it, but the inverse of that moment where you're looking at something you've been doing for a while or something that once brought you a lot of joy, and then you're thinking, okay, like when does this, like what's the second life of this? Like, is this over? So I'm going to talk to you about a couple creative projects and those moments that I've had. So this first one is a project I did with my friend Mara Friedman, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a newsletter where we were encouraging people to go to happy hour and then write some poems. So we were telling people to send us their poems. We were putting them in this newsletter. We did it for like 6 months. It was super fun. Some really bad poems, which I loved. And what we realized is that we were super into doing this. We were both like promoting it. We would trade weeks. It was a weekly newsletter. And then after a while, we both kept forgetting to do it. And people would email us and say, hey, I missed Drunk Poetry Circle. Like something happened. And I'd be like, Mara, oh my God, you didn't do the newsletter. And she'd say, it was your week. And I was like, oh. And the lesson we learned from this is you never want someone to be emailing you and saying, where's the newsletter that I signed up for and sent a poem to? Like my creative work isn't there. But the thing we didn't do with this project is we didn't set up a moment to assess and say, okay, like where is this going? Do we still like doing it? What's the second life of this? It just kind of went away. And that was a huge lesson I learned, was like no matter what it is, it could be like a really fun side hustle or like something you're doing to maybe jumpstart another part of your creative life, but you need to have that moment where you look at it and you're like, okay, like how are we doing? Let's take a moment and pause. Like, is this the end? Do we keep going? What's next? that was a lesson I took into this next project I'm going to talk about. This was another project I did with a friend and a colleague, Masuma Ahuja. We were doing it for work, but it was also like just kind of a fun creative handmade thing we were doing. It was very much something we initiated on our own. We were asking people to call into a number in December of 2014 and tell us the biggest lesson they had learned in the last year. And then we took all of those voicemails and we put them on a Tumblr, and the Tumblr got like 30,000 followers in 1 week. People were obsessed with it. We were so on fire with it. We were both like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing we've ever done. And then we took a moment after a month and said, okay, like, where is this going? You know, like, what are we gonna do with it? And it had been so popular and so inspirational. This isn't the logo, but this is a voicemail that somebody sent in, and I thought it was appropriate to share because what we realized was, yeah, we did need a moment to rest, and we also needed a moment to think, what does the second half of this look like? And we couldn't really answer that question, so we kept doing it, and people didn't really think it was that interesting anymore. We were losing our energy, and that was the second lesson I learned was like, if you can't see what the other half of something looks like, or if you don't have a vision for something going forward, like, don't force it. Like, take that moment, pause, and if you're thinking like, okay, this is the end, don't be afraid to say that. Like, just say, okay, this is the moment where I've decided, like, tie a ribbon on it, be done with it. And so the third project I wanted to talk about was something I've been doing for like a year and a half, and I'm kind of in that moment right now, where I, after a year and a half, took a moment, looked at my newsletter. It's this newsletter where I send daily profiles of cool women from history you've probably never heard of. And people like it, people send me suggestions all the time. I still have a lot of fun doing it, so I kind of did that self-check-in, and I was like, okay, I really like this. This is still something that's bringing me joy. It's still something I see a lot of value in doing. It's still something that really creatively invigorates me. And now I'm in that moment where I'm like, okay, what does the second half of this look like? And I've talked a lot about this with my friends. Like, my friend Alex is in the audience, and she hears me say this all the time. But I've decided, like, that second half is like, I really want it to be a book, or I really want it to be something physical that people can hold, like some kind of encapsulation of these 100-something different daily emails. And now I have to do it. So I really benefited from taking that moment to think, like, what is the end of this? What is the second half of this? Does this still, energize me and make me super happy? Like, what's kind of my moment of tying a ribbon on it here? And that's where I'm at. So I hope you guys all learn something from it, like, take something with that spark, and also find like that moment to close, that moment of second life. And thank you.
Big thanks to Julia. When she sent that in, I think it resonated with a lot of us who are in creative pursuits where you do hold on really tightly to things, or at the very least wonder where something's going, or if it's run its course or not. And I think another aspect of that is that feedback loop too. So we as a community need to support each other and be able to let people sort of create that dialogue, like Julia talked about having with her friends. And if you like the idea and you want to sign up for A Woman to Know, maybe you want to let Julia know, maybe it's not time to sunset it yet. That's the kind of dialogue we want to create, so I certainly encourage that.
Hi, everybody. Everybody kept saying you have 5 minutes. It's very little time, but I just kept thinking these are the longest 5 minutes of my life. So I'll do the best. I will also try not to talk about myself because it is not about me. These 5 minutes will be about the moment in time that we are living in and the protagonists of this moment in time. This is a very tumultuous moment in time. We live in a world of contrast. We live in a globalized world that is more divided than ever. And we see these destructive forces in the media, on the streets, everywhere we are, but we forget to notice the glimmerings of hope for a new world, constructive forces. So today I want to talk to you about, well, I know Joel said that you guys are heroes for being here this morning, but I want to talk about the real heroes in DC. Who are these guys? These are middle schoolers who live in Columbia Heights, and these are only 5 of over 100 middle schoolers who are involved in a program that is empowering them to serve their communities. one thing that I want to share with you, a few things that I've learned from these middle schoolers. I've learned that each person with their own talents is able to contribute to the betterment of the world. I know it sounds difficult to see everybody as a contributor, but we have to learn to see that. I've also learned that justice demands universal participation. So if we really want to help the world, we all have to contribute to it. I've also learned through them to work in teams. We tend to think individually, but these guys think collectively. They think how they support each other and how they can execute service projects. And most importantly, I've learned that if we are concerned with a better world, we need to help and build capacity in others. So providing people the tools that they need to make a change. And I'll give you an example of this.
What would you like to change in this community or see different?
I wish that people respected things a little bit more, so it was cleaner and people were nicer to each other. But
Yeah, so do you have any questions you want to ask us for the interview?
what do you guys want to do to help the community?
Well, what
Keep
we do
people
is
off the
called
street.
service projects and service projects. It's more of us. It's like different groups of us, and we go around to help. Like one, we could like go around, pick up trash. That could be one service project.
Yeah.
Or another service project is that we could go to stores and help out. And basically, the service projects is when you just help out the community.
Ooh, that's awesome. That sounds like a really good
projects.
idea.
And we meet up every Saturday and read books about people that do service too. to learn.
Yeah, so this is one project that they put together. They were using their iPhone 6, which is a tool. It was their tool. And they wanted to document their neighborhood. So the way that they think about service is not as that they provide goods to people. The way that they see service is that they see everyone as noble and dignified. And they wanted to really learn about their neighborhood before deciding what to do to serve it. So they went around, they interviewed people, they put a little documentary together, and now they are really thinking about what they can do to serve it. So I've also learned from them that we need to learn to see the reality that we live in order to contribute to it. So this is a program called the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program. It's happening all over DC, and if you guys want to learn more about it, I'm happy to talk to you after this. And yeah, thank you for your time.
I think it was a hugely interesting point in talking to Maryam about her work and really kind of, yeah, I think we all do it, right? So we're like, what do moments mean to you? And it's right in the question. It's like about you, about me. And to turn that on its head and be like, well, really, is it? Or is it about what you can do to set the stage for these kids in the future is awesome. And, you know, big kudos to her for her work. And I think something we can all do better at.
Everyone was so good without notes. Mine will be brief, I promise. So big thanks to Creative Mornings, to all of you for coming out and creating this moment, this space, this time. It's really a wonderful thing, and to the library for hosting us. My name's Lisa Olson, and I am an energy economist. But my favorite moments are my creative moments, which are when I get to be a singer-songwriter. And one of my favorite all-time just loves of music is composer and DC native Duke Ellington. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Duke, music, jazz music, and life. So Duke Ellington was born here in DC in 1899. He was born at about 20th and M Northwest. His parents loved music in the home. They both played piano. So by 7 years old, he was in piano lessons. The music of the era was ragtime. And in addition to his lessons, he went around and observed pianists and band leaders and absorbed what he could, improving his techniques and his professional style. As a fun note, certainly his name was Edward Kennedy. He was known as a genteel man and a very good dresser. One of his friends called him Duke, and the name stuck. So He dropped out of high school about 3 months early to form his first band. Their first gig was up on U Street at the True Reformers Hall. They were paid 75 cents. And not long after that, he and some of his band members cruised up to New York City, which was really an important place for him to create and grow over the next, half a century. From 1923 to 27, Duke and his band made about 60 recordings, and in December of 27, they started a residence at the Cotton Club in New York's Harlem, which was really an important residency. They were broadcast over the radio, which allowed his innovative jazz music to be heard around the country. And the Cotton Club is kind of legend of Duke Ellington music. So beyond that, he continued to compose for the duration of his life. Of course, the early jazz is what we all know and love, but he also has a catalog of some classical music towards the end of his life, and he did some movie scoring as well. It was said that he was even scoring music in his hospital before he passed. So what is it about jazz music that speaks to me? It's the musical moments, the moments that make up the songs. It's of course, the swing that we all know and love, and Duke really embodied swing when he wrote "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing," which many musicians have covered and recorded over the time. And so within composition, there are these different tools that allow these moments to make up these masterpiece songs, and I'm going to cover a couple of them for fun. Of course, the swing rhythm. In the harmonic chords, there's something called a dissonant chord, which I think is really interesting. So in chords, you have your 1, 3, 5, as you see over on the side, on the top, and those make really pretty whole chords. So dissonance is when you move that third up to the fourth. And all of a sudden, there's two notes that are sitting right next to each other, and you're really uncomfortable. And composers use that to create this tension, to create this uncomfortable space, such that you want the chord to resolve. And when it resolves, there's this release, and you feel, What jazz did is it certainly used dissonant chords, but it also took a dissonant note and it made what's called a seventh chord. And jazz music is rooted in this seventh chord structure, which is actually really beautiful and again, innovative and revolutionized how we create music. So really briefly, we have 1, 3, 5. That's a pretty chord. Here's our jazz, our seventh. Beautiful. Now here's a dissonant. We want resolution. It feels so good when it resolves. Also used as glissando, or you change the frequency, which changes your note, and you get that where you kind of get that like, ooh, I feel that. So a few moments used in music composition that create these great pieces. Now, of course, another part of jazz music is improvisation. And I mean, just inextricably linked. These incredible solos, these drum breaks, these trumpet solos. And to have improvisation, you have to have a good foundation set. You have to have the fundamentals, the rhythm, the groove, such that when the improvisation happens, there's kind of the backbone, the structure, and the person who's improvising or going off and doing their solo has the freedom for self-expression. So I think that's a really neat part of jazz music. And as I was thinking about jazz music, I was like, wow, this is really kind of an allegory for where we find ourselves. Dissonance, anyone? This tension, as we've talked about. We're begging for resolution. But as I looked at jazz, I was like, wow, that's really showing us like jazz almost they innovated with dissonance, and they said, I'm going to take that, I'm going to make a seventh chord, and it's going to be really beautiful. So certainly tension to resolution. So overall, again, dissonant time. Duke says, a problem is a chance for you to do your best. So let's take some of our learnings. Just listen to jazz, because A, it calms the nerves, it's fabulous. I mean, you're just like, whoo, thank you. Frequencies can bend and slide. We have to practice to create the foundation so that when we want to go off and sit in on a jam session, which there again, I mean, musicians sit in on their own jam session, but here we can sit in on our own jam session and take our creative talents and go work with middle schoolers in Columbia Heights. Like, what an amazing thing to be able to do. You have to be ready to improvise, but you have the tools and the structure to be able to do it. And do your own solo, improvise, and ultimately the moments make up masterpieces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can see why I think we thought that talk and that concept was a good balance to the other things we're talking about, where we're talking about moments actually within creative work is a really compelling way to think about it, and how they build up to create a whole piece. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. So today I'm going to make a case for the band Nickelback. It's going to be awesome. All right. And we're off. I was born Nigerian American. I was born in Durham, North Carolina, mostly by accident. I came out really early. And, you know, my parents were on vacation. It's the last time I was ever early for anything in my life, because it almost killed my mom. I mean, why would I want to be early ever again? But I was born Nigerian American. I was born not two parts of a whole, but two wholes of a greater whole. And that's kind of a weird, confusing statement. But the reality is I spent the most of my life trying to navigate that. And I'm not just saying that, well, I am saying that so that I can show you how cute I was as a baby. Because no matter how bad this presentation is, you'll remember that face. I was cute. But I'm saying it because I think it prepared me better for the tension of doing creative work and doing design than anything. And that's because I think design is reconciliation at its core. Design is trying to find resolve and beauty given a set of extremes, right? So design and creativity exists somewhere between this and that, between us and other, between black and white, between left and right. And having to navigate the reality of being 100% Nigerian and being 100% American my entire life, I feel like I've been designing since the day that I was born. We kind of are in an interesting time because I feel like, at least in my lifetime, which honestly hasn't been that long, but I feel like there's been no better time for designers and creatives and the people in this room to take the helm than now, because we're all steeped in the art and the craft of reconciling. It's just taking that practice from Illustrator and pen and paper and sketchbook or whatever we work with and moving it to people. And I'll explain why. See, identity in our world today has become a single-dimensional thing, right? Whether it be politically, culturally, most people are only permitted to be one thing. And any deviation from that one thing at any given moment is almost, it's bad. It's a bad thing, right? Polarization is our default, and compromise is almost criminal. And it's really unfortunate. So, you know, I can be black, democratic, Christian, and I can love mumbo sauce, or I can be white, libertarian, atheist, and love ketchup. And any idea that I can do anything deviating from this single linear path of identity is a problem. And there are even some of those monikers and identifiers that, quite honestly, just destroy and trump every other identifier. Like, hey, I like Nickelback. The second someone says you like Nickelback, you're just like, yeah. I don't know, friendship over, it's done. And the one we're more familiar with is this one. This is sort of what's going on in our world today. The challenge here is that as designers, inherently as creatives, we have to be empathetic. We just talked about that, right? Empathy is impossible given a single parameter. It's really hard to see yourself in other people when you can only see one thing in that person. And it's really hard to expect other people to see themselves in you when you only define yourself as that one thing. So what does living in between actually look like? It kind of looks more like this, right? We've got parameters that might be on either extreme, but we all constantly navigate those every single day. For me, in a lot of ways, it's this. I'm Nigerian, I'm American. You know, I have conservative ideals and ideologies, and I have liberal ones. I'm a person of faith, but doubt is very much present in that faith walk. I love mumbo sauce, but sometimes I just want ketchup. And quite frankly, if we're all honest with ourselves, we're all a little bit Nickelback, right? Even though we just claim, just no. But the reality is we are. And over time, if we add the element of time to this, this is sort of it. This is it. We walk through our day, depending on the context, depending on the interaction, depending on the environment, we are this thing. And I think it's super duper cool, because if we're willing to acknowledge this reality of our humanity, if we're really willing to acknowledge that we're not entirely resolved and we don't know the right answer, and no one person or group knows the right answer, and then we're also willing to acknowledge that moments affect other moments that haven't yet happened, that actually adds a third axis to this diagram, and it's human. This is what we are. This is sort of what we're made of, right? This is humanity at its finest. It's also dissonance. It's discomfort. It's tension. My favorite, who would agree that there's a certain level of wonder in creativity, right? My favorite definition of wonder is by Richard Rohr, and it was very timely because I heard this yesterday. But wonder is sitting in the midst of a question. It doesn't say wonder is answering a question or sitting there with the sort of idea and hope to answer the question. It's just sitting in the midst of the question, acknowledging the discomfort, being okay with being uncomfortable, and just sitting there. So I think that we would all be better as designers, as design leaders, as creatives in the world that we currently live in, if we're willing to admit just for a moment that Nickelback might not be that bad. Think about it. Seriously, think about it. So I wanted to toss in a picture of one of my favorite moments in DC that I've ever had since I lived here, just sort of walking through the National Gallery of Art. There was this father who was walking from picture to picture, from sculpture to sculpture, with his son and illustrating things. And he gets to the room where the Sistine Chapel is recreated on the ceiling. And on a Saturday in the summer in the Smithsonian Museum, lays on his back, puts his son on his stomach, and just starts talking. That moment exists somewhere between, sir, you can't do that, and holy hell, this is the best thing in the entire world, right? And for me, it exists somewhere between the relationship that I had with my father, which very much was not this, and the relationship that I hope to have with my son. If we're willing to acknowledge the reality that, again, it's not all black and white, it's not all left and right, there are things and there are realities that are steeped in tension, and they need to be steeped in tension just for us to be as human as we can. We will understand as creatives that the cure doesn't lie in movements per se, the cure lies in moments. In these moments, in moments that you experience every day. Thank you all for entertaining this madness.
So now we see why I was so amped to get up here, right? Thank you so much, Obi. That was amazing. I think everybody's given us a lot to think about.